Good morning, everyone. My name is Fatimah Loren Mohammed. I am the director of the Trauma Advocacy Initiative at Equal Justice USA. EJUSA is a national criminal justice reform organization that seeks to transform the justice system from one that harms to one that heals. In my work, I have the honor of bringing police and community members together to create a vision for a trauma-informed response to violence that centers the needs of crime survivors in the wake of harm and interrupts toxic cycles of violence. Danielle, thank you so much. Where are you? There you are. Hi. Thank you for grounding this discussion in the stories of survivors. Thank you to the panelists. You and what you've experienced is so important. Thank you for the wisdom that you share with us. For those of you who are survivors in the audience, thank you for being who you are and surviving what it is that you survived. For those of you who are watching on live stream, who are survivors, we acknowledge you, and we hope that this panel, being grounded in these stories, gives you courage in your own way to share your stories in a way that's meaningful to you. This panel is incredible. These are the national leaders on the front lines in an ever-growing survivor-led movement to call for criminal justice reform and new ways to respond to violence that promote health, healing, and true community safety. So on our panel, we have Sujutha Baliga, Director of the Restorative Justice Project and Vice President of Impact Justice; DaMareo Cooper, Executive Director of the Ohio Organizing Collaborative; Aqeela Sherrills, National Training Director for Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice at the Alliance for Safety and Justice; Ms. Susan Jackson, Advisory Board Member of Common Justice and co-founder of The Village; and Dorothy Johnson-Speight, Founder and Executive Director of Mothers in Charge, and an organizational member of the National Council for Incarcerated formerly incarcerated women and girls. Give them a round of applause. As Danielle mentioned, you all have index cards, and as she shared, staff will be collecting them for this panel. So at some point, someone will bring your cards up to me, and I'll read them to you later in the panel. But to kick us off, I wanted to ask you all to share ways in which our current responses to violence, namely mass incarceration, is failing survivors and communities of survivors. Help us understand how the current system treats survivors, from those who've experienced sexual assault, robbery, survivors of attempted murder, domestic violence, to family members of murder victims. Please. Dorothy, please go ahead, start.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. Good morning. And my gratitude to Danielle and everyone here who helped to make this discussion happen today. My 24-year-old son, colleague Jabbar Johnson, was shot 7 times over a parking space 15 years ago. I started Mothers in Charge as a way to handle my pain, my anger, my tears, and everything I felt as a result of colleague's death. He was 24 years old, graduated from the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, and was doing wonderful things with his life, but a very angry, out-of-control person shot him over a parking space. So I started Mothers in Charge with a group of other mothers who had lost children as a way to address the issue of violence, but also find ways that we could heal. I've also served on the Philadelphia Prison Board for many years under our mayor and our current mayor as well. I've seen both sides of it. I have mothers in our organization that have lost children to violence, and some of those same mothers have children that are incarcerated. We have families on both sides. We've got to find a way to address healing. What I hear most times from mothers who've lost children is, how long is this pain going to last? How am I going to heal from this pain? That is the question. And this mass incarceration doesn't deal with that at all. It depletes our communities across this country of the resources that we need to heal. And that is what is needed in communities across this country, healing. This is a book that Mothers in Charge published. It's called Mothers in Charge, Faces of Courage. After the murder of their children, these women began a campaign for peace in the city of brotherly love. I also have organized a group called Women Across the Nation Making a Difference, which is also mothers who've lost children that are not a part of the Mothers in Charge organization. We have 12 chapters across the country. We have a Brooklyn chapter here in New York. Reese Snapper is the chapter leader there. We have chapters in San Francisco, LA, Kansas City, all across this country. And these are mothers who want to address the issue of violence and mass incarceration, which is destroying our communities. I'm going to stop there, and I'll let someone else answer.
That sounds great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Jackson.
I am also a mother of a young man who got murdered at the age of 24. Doing the right thing, trying to make a difference within his community. But there was a gentleman who, for whatever reason, walked around with a chip on his shoulder. Did not like the idea that here was a young black man who wasn't street banging, but was very respectful. That young man came back and shot him in the head. No reason. And in that situation, I had to come to recognize, why did that young man do what he did? The young man went to prison. And my question was, did prison really change his way of thinking? Did prison give him the opportunity to really look inside himself to see what he had done? Or it just gave him a place to hide and to get through the system, to come back the same way he went in? So mass incarceration for me doesn't work if there's not a plan in place to rehabilitate. If you're not going to rehabilitate, then what we're forming out here is re-incarceration, which keeps going on and on and on. So if you're going to have mass incarceration, I think you should have mass programs that will deter people from going into mass incarcerations.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, my name is Aqeela Sherrills, and I'm from a little community called Watts down in South Los Angeles. Largest concentration of public housing west of the Mississippi. I grew up in the Jordan housing projects where I participated in what a lot of social justice activists call the longest running war in the history of this country, which is urban street gang wars. In LA County alone, over the past, I would say between 1983 and 2003, there were over 20,000 gang-related deaths in LA County. And it doesn't include those who have been permanently maimed or incarcerated for the rest of their life behind their participation. So Watts is a community where the families, the parents and the children suffer from traumatic stress disorder, hypervigilance, vicarious trauma. But because we live in a system that's built on systemic racism and implicit bias, our children, black and brown, young boys and girls who participated in this war, their cries for help fell on deaf ears. We got labeled gangs, and the label itself was meant to dehumanize the person behind it and also to desensitize the public to the plight of these young black and brown youth and young adults engaged in this war. I witnessed things no child should ever be subject to, watching the crack cocaine trade overturn my community like Hurricane Katrina. I was one of a few guys that I grew up with that escaped in a sense, and I was hiding on my college campus in 1987 when I had my transformative experience. There I met a woman who I was crazy in love with, and at the same time deeply wounded as a result of the experiences I had in the neighborhood, and I violated her in very unfortunate ways. And as a result, I had to do the first noble thing in my life, which was to tell this woman the truth. And a part of that admission, I shared with her that I was sexually abused as a kid. Now, when I exposed those words, it seems like my whole life flashed in front of my eyes, and I was transported immediately back to the place, 3rd grade, where I was promising I would never expose that secret. And I realized that I never questioned any of the violence that I saw happening in the neighborhood, because ultimately it meant to question the violence that I experienced in my own household. And I didn't have the courage or the language to do so. But I was fortunate that I had a professor in my life, Dr. Johnny Scott at Cal State Northridge, who forced me to read. I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. I read James Baldwin's The Evidence of Things Not Seen, and they politicized me and encouraged me. And I went back to the neighborhood, and over a period of 4 years, myself and my brother and a group of friends, in partnership with Hall of Fame football great Jim Brown, we organized a peace treaty in Watts that changed the quality of life in our community. In the first 2 years of the peace treaty, gang homicides dropped 44%. This was a community-driven strategy to reduce violence and crime in our neighborhood and sustain it, because we believed that we were the only one that had the solution to the problem in our neighborhood. So I'm going to fast forward, 16 years frontline in this work, took American to 15 cities across the country, started the Community Self-Determination Institute to develop models for what peace looks like in urban war zones. And my oldest son, I was a young father, graduated from high school in '87, went to Humboldt State University on a scholarship, came home and went a break, went to a party with some of his good friends, and was shot to death at the party. Now, I'm no novice to violence. I grew up witnessing it and seeing it all my life. But nothing ever prepares you for the loss of your child.
Yes.
Some years later, I reconnected with Lenore Anderson and Robert Brooks in the founding of Californians for Safety and Justice, and co-founded Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, specifically to ensure that my son's death would not be in vain.
Yeah.
So we reframed the conversation around who victims was. Like Dorothy said, it's not uncommon in our neighborhood to have one mother's child buried in a prison and the other one in the graveyard. It's not uncommon. So this definition of who victims were, it's just too narrow for me. So we had to expand the definition. And we recognized that folks in the neighborhood, black and brown folks, didn't identify as victims. We had to come up with new terminology, and we coined this term survivors. Because conceivably, we didn't want folks to experience what we went through, and that we were on this path of our respective healing journey. And over the next couple of years, we built the largest crime survivors network in the state, over 6,000 members currently in California. We leveraged our collective voice in policy conversations and passed some of the most progressive pieces of criminal justice reform legislation in the country. Prop 47, Prop 57, Illinois, 2872, the Neighborhood Safety Act, and are continuing to do this work. So now with the Alliance for Safety and Justice, we're looking to, build the movement for survivors nationally and change the criminal justice system through policy, but also, redefine public safety in communities with a shared strategy with law enforcement and, faith-based groups and other community-based agencies to bring about change. Yeah. Thank you.
How you all doing? Good morning. My name is DaMareo Cooper. I'm from Akron, Ohio. Oh, word. That's what's up. I didn't know we were out here like that. We should talk. I'm really humbled by the stories that were shared prior to my story. As the organizing director of the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, we work a lot on criminal justice issues and sentencing reform issues. What is interesting, what I guess I have to add to this conversation, because I think everything that I probably would have said has been said as far as why the criminal justice system is not serving survivors of crime. The only thing that I would add is that it takes away from the humanization of everyone in the process, right? Like everyone, the person who was the victim of the crime, the person who committed the crime, the communities that these people come from, which are like my community. So I'm from Akron, and there's one person, I guess, who may understand what I'm about to say, but I'm from Elizabeth Park, which is called the Bottom in Akron, literally. It's at the bottom of a hill, and it's kind of the bottom of the economic ladder in my city. I've seen a lot of different things in the projects where I come from that have like helped shape my own understanding of what we're talking about when we talk about trauma-informed services and what that means and what people go through in a series of their lives, from seeing someone get stabbed or shot by their mother. I've seen a person get stabbed by their mother. Like, I'm actually wrestling with realizing myself in this work as a crime survivor. Yeah. Like, I'm actually coming into this consciousness now. I was robbed at gunpoint a week before my son was born with my best friend in the world. He had two twin 5-year-olds, and about 5 young guys. Like, they caught us walking home. I was walking back from my house to his house. He lived about half a mile away, and some young kids kind of just we walked into their trap, like they caught us. And I'm terrified because the guy holding the gun on me is kind of like I'm looking him in the face, and I can see like he's scared. I mean, I'm a large black man, right? Like, everybody can see that. But he's looking at me, he's scared, and so I started coaching him through this robbery, right? Because I don't want to get shot. And anybody who's ever been robbed before, if someone looks scared, the best thing to do is to start coaching them, like, do you want me to lay down? Do you want me to give you my wallet? What do you want me to do? Yeah. And so I just remember laying on the ground, and my friend Brian, who's also from the Bottom, I remember laying on the ground because I'm coaching this kid. I'm like, I'm going to lay down. I don't have anything, but you could check my pockets. And I look over at my friend, and I see in his face, he was struggling at the time, and I see him making this like life decision, right? He's like, I'm not going to get on the ground. I see him saying that, and I kind of send him this thought bubble or prayer or like intervention, divine. And I've looked at him, and I'm just thinking, I'm like, get on the ground. We lost. Like, we're caught. And I just remember, like, he eventually did get down. I remember walking away and him just being, we're both kind of upset about what happened. And I look at him, and I'm like, should we call the police, right? Yeah. Right. And he's like, for what? Like, and when I think back on that experience, right, I think about, one, why were these young people out? We were out at like 1:30 in the morning, right? So there's an issue about like, they were like 15. These are like 12-year-olds, 15. Yeah. They were young. And I'm like, well, why are they out right now? And then, why don't my friend want to call the police? And why am I totally in agreement? Because we did not call the police. And I'm just like, yeah, that's, let's just go to sleep and wake up and be alive. And when we think about how this system is underserving folks, it's like, even when you are going through a situation, the last thing people in my community actually want to do is call the folks who are supposed to protect and serve and provide safety in communities. And I think it's because the model is flawed. And we all know that the model is flawed. We all know that it's an extension of racism, that it is racist. We know that. And I think what we need to do to fix it, and part of the thing we need to do to fix it, is help people like me, who are just like completely desensitized. I mean, people get robbed in my neighborhood. Like, that's just what happens. And I think folks like myself need to start understanding themselves as crime survivors. I think this frame is so liberating, but it's scary. Because, I was talking to a friend before I got here, and I was like, I don't know if I want to go up there and say I was a crime survivor, because then that means I'm a victim, and then everybody on the internet is going to know I'm a victim. People like, no, I don't want to be a victim. But I do understand the need for us to start framing this work as crime survivor, because it's a humanizing frame. It's like, I can be hurt. Most people look at me and they don't think I can be like I can endure more pain. There's studies that show that, like, my body is able to endure more pain, which we know comes from the fact that, you know, we were put in a subhuman status for so long and that we were able to endure more pain. And then we internalize that as like, I'm able to deal with whatever comes. And I think we really have to start humanizing our experience in order for us to build enough strength and power to, like, fight back from a human perspective. So, I don't know, that's a lot, but yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So grateful for all your faces and for folks watching through the interwebs. So my name is Sujatha, and I think the two things that resonated the most from what you just said was, should we call the police? What for? Why? And let's just go to bed and wake up in the morning and be alive. And so we come from different worlds in some ways. Not so different because I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, which is not so different from Akron, or outside Akron in some ways. Well, outside Akron. But I'm thinking back on my own childhood. Throughout my childhood and adolescence, I was sexually abused by my father in a small town in rural Pennsylvania, where I was the only person of color in my school. And it never even occurred to me to contact the authorities or anyone in my school for help. Those were the people who were going to get us in more trouble. And I definitely thought about things in the us, my family against the world. It was only as I aged that I sort of put it together, what people call the crimigration machine, or what I think of from my childhood as sort of the crimigration CPS cluster muck. That I was doing everything to avoid. And so if someone had asked me what I needed or I wanted as a child, I certainly wouldn't have said, lock up my father and embroil my mother and my sister and I in complex immigration processes and then take me away and put me with a family that's practicing a religion that's not mine, and in homes where we know sexual abuse happens as well, right? To be frank, I'd rather be sexually abused by my own family. And when I think back on what it is that allowed me to survive, right, there was the intervention of some very specific people along the way that allowed me to survive. And it certainly wasn't systems. And it's not that I don't think that systems could do better or be better, or that we don't need to create systems that do better and are better for survivors and for all of us. But I think a lot about this idea of what would it be like if we started naming laws like Aqeela's law, right? We talk about this a lot, right? What was it that worked that allowed Aqeela Sherrills to be who he is today, right? What's Sujatha's law? It's not mass incarceration. It was not mass incarceration that allowed me to be who I am today. If anything, the very fact of mass incarceration, or what the beginnings of mass incarceration were at that time, and the nexus of immigration law, were the very systems in theory designed to protect me, were the things that kept me silent about what was happening in my home. And for my friends who did testify against their fathers, the entire criminal legal system is basically set up to gaslight you, right? I'm going to sit there on the stand and have you question me as a child about what happened, and somehow you and this questioning and this whole thing that is the state is something that I'm going to choose over just trying to find a way to make it stop within our family, which we did, right? Which we did. So I find that the system is not designed based on the wisdom of those of us who have lived through things, right? So I would like to see an Aqeela's law and a Sujatha's law and a law in the name of every single person sitting here about how it is that we actually do get out of bed every day and continue to do things to try to make the world a better place. From my side, I would like to see a lot more restorative justice programs happening, really ones that start with asking that question, how were you harmed and what do you need, and whose obligation is it to meet those needs, and that's what accountability looks like, right? That healing is what accountability looks like. When I think about why did my father do what he did and how trauma begets trauma, begets trauma, begets trauma, I needed my family to heal. I needed my father to heal so that we could stop transgenerational cycles of trauma and violence and prison is just about the last thing I can imagine, as Danielle so beautifully stated this morning, to do that. It's the opposite of that. And so I would love for us to spend some time asking those of us who have survived and thrived and moved on in beautiful ways, what does it look like to make that happen?
Thank you. I'm so deeply touched, and I know the audience, I know you all are too. I'm going to ask that you hold your applause so we can actually continue talking, but we know that you're with us, right? We feel you with us. I'm hearing a theme around how we talk about survivorship out in the world, right? Our public dialogue about survivorship. And there's a lot missing. There are a lot of stories missing. And it not only influences the system that gets created, but also how we understand trauma and our access to services for our own healing. Aqeela, DaMareo, I want to begin with you. What's missing? What stories are missing? And what do we do about it?
You mean as far as like my friends' stories?
Yeah, yeah, those stories.
So I'll tell you a story about, so in Akron, we built this like grassroots community center. It's really a community center we call like a cultural community center. It's really like me and my friends who put money into it every month. But you got to imagine rent in Akron is like $400 a month for us. Nice size space. Look, everyone's like, wow. Yeah, move to Akron. It's for the people back home. So we had a community meeting like 2 weeks ago. Yeah. And like, here's an interesting story that's just been stuck in my mind since I met this young guy. So we're having a community conversation. We have these community conversations where we put people in circles, kind of like, sort of like rites of passage. So it's like oldest to youngest. And then we asked people when they were 12 years old, what were their communities like? And if you got the right group of people, if you have a good age range of people, you actually can track like communities becoming less and less safe. And then we like insert policies or like major events like here's Reagan, here's the actualization of the drug war, here, you know. And so we had one of those, and one of the young men who came, he walked in, he was kind of slow, he had like a cane. And at the end when we were having a discussion, it came out, so this guy, he's like a gang leader, you know, like real gang leader in Akron, like tattoos, face, everything. And he starts telling us this story about how 3 weeks prior to this meeting, someone that he was incarcerated with caught him or found him in the street and started shooting. And he shot him in the leg, and then he stood over and he shot him 3 times in the stomach. And so he was just kind of recovering from this incident. He ends up killing the guy. So while he's getting shot, he pulls out his gun and he kills the guy who's shooting him. And now he's like facing a manslaughter charge for this event. And so he's in the room with us and we're just talking about these things. And he's like, well, I never even knew half of the stuff that you all are talking about. He's like 30-something years old. He's like, I never even knew about like the drug war or COINTELPRO, or he never had any reference for these things that had happened to shape the environment that he grew up in. But here he is shot and looking at going to jail for being shot because he has gang ties and he had a weapon with disability and all these other charges are getting like stacked up on him. He said the police came and tried to talk to him. He didn't want to talk to him, which are things that we've been learning through this work with, with Common Justice and Alliance for Safety and Justice. People don't want to talk to the police after they got shot. I mean, after that, I was thinking about, and when we connect this to like the history of slavery, when we think about like, when we're talking about violence or state-sanctioned violence on black bodies, we can't really have that conversation without talking about slavery and the history of race in this country. And I was thinking about it, and I was thinking to myself, one of the things that we don't think about is like slaves didn't know where they were, right? Like they didn't know they were in Alabama or Georgia and that like you could go this way and get to North Carolina. Like they really did not know where they were at. And then I'm thinking about this brother who just been shot, and we're talking to him about, what precinct he lives in, what county he lives in. Like we're having these conversations about where we're at, like where we're actually at. And I feel like one of the things that we're going through as a community is people don't actually know where they are. They know, like, I'm from the east side of Akron. Yeah. But they don't know, like, that is considered 5L inside of the 5th Ward, inside of this congressional district, inside of this state representative district. People don't have this understanding, and because of that, it's like magic. Right, like what's happening is magic, or like slaves not knowing where they are. They don't know how to get free. They don't know how to liberate themselves. And I think a lot of the stories that we're not telling is really around that one, where people are actually located. And then I think there's actually stories around people who have been reformed that we don't talk about. And the folks who have been reformed don't know where they're at. Even after they've been to prison, they don't know where they come home to. It's just like slavery again. So I think that the stories that need to be told are about the young people who've seen things or actions of violence. One of my earliest memories of police is a guy named Wolfman who was chasing a dude down in our projects. He caught this teenager, put handcuffs on him, and then started beating him up. And there's like 12 kids playing football across the field, and we're all watching it like, wow. And then you go to school and the police is there with a little sticker badge. You're like, I don't know about this, right? And so I think like these real stories about how the history of race has shaped our community, like we have to tell these stories in a very raw and real way. Yeah. Because then it helps people get context for where they're at. It helps people see like where I am. And then like they can participate in their liberation. I think one thing that Danielle said earlier is really important is like we should not be seen as like the new leader. I'll speak for myself. I don't want to be seen as like the new leader of violence reform in America. Like there's a bunch of leaders in violence reform. Yeah. We all need to be seen as part of folks looking at this struggle, looking at this thing and working together to struggle to figure it out. And I think like a lot of those stories need to be told inside of communities so that people can locate themselves. Yeah. Inside of time, space, right? Okay, I quit.
And just to piggyback on what DaMareo was saying, just about this time, space, like kind of continuum, that stories are, to me, a part of one's healing journey, exposing the deep secrets in your personal life. Literally gives others permission to do the same. And it clears space in the heart and the imagination actually for new things to be able to enter so that you can digest new things. That's right. Yeah. So, when I think about how stories informed, our collective work in California, I think about, some of the groundbreaking reports that we produced, right? Because there's always been a strong victims' rights movement. And I want to, just say victims' rights, because we're the survivors movement. There's a victims' rights movement, right? So there's always been a strong victims' rights movement in the state of California. And they, leveraged their voices to push 3 strikes and you're out, trying our children as adults. A lot of the laws that they pushed, severely impacted, the communities that experienced the brunt of violence and crime in the state, negatively. And so although we empathize with the victims' rights folks, we were like, hey, the laws that you're pushing is impacting our neighborhood, severely. And we want to think about alternative ways of being able to, we want to look at the common denominators of the things that affect us as victims, as survivors, so that we can work on those things collectively. So the victims' rights movement would always say, survivors want this, or victims want that. But believe it or not, nobody had ever even asked folks in the state like what they actually wanted. So we produced one of the first reports in the state polled some 2,500 self-identified victims and asked them, what do they want? And it came out, saying exactly what we thought. That yes, we want to hold the perpetrator accountable, but at the same time, we want healing services. We want recovery services. We don't want to just, waddle in our own self-pity and be broken and fractured forever. We want to turn this pain into power, as my sister Maddie Scott says, in the report it said that survivors wanted probation 4 times to 1 over incarceration. That we wanted alternative, we wanted restorative justice, we wanted alternative healing systems to support us in our respective healing journey. We also produced a report around the narratives around what victims want, or what their experiences were. And I saw, Heather in here earlier, who produced that report for Californians for Safety and Justice. And it was profound and it was phenomenal. And it shifted the narrative in the state around who victims were and what we wanted. And I think that has been the real impetus for this survivors movement. So, the stories are critical. Because rarely, I remember the first time we had our Survivor Speaks conference in Sacramento, we took 400 survivors to the state. We took 200 people up on buses from from LA to Sacramento. And we did a whole processional. 400 folks surrounded the Capitol. And we said, we're not bringing retribution and revenge. We're bringing healing services. Because we understand that hurt people hurt people. And that we want to restore balance. We want to come up with shared safety ideas and smart justice as opposed to being tough on crime. And this is what's been effective for us.
Thank you. So I want to share with you all my experience as a child survivor of sexual violence. And that when I shared my experience at my school, I was removed from school and taken by myself to the police station and asked to give a report without any loved one present. And so when I hear you, DaMareo, when I hear all of you say, had I had history, had a context, had a place to locate myself, and that by locating myself, I had access to an understanding of what healing would look like, and what was offered to me was healing for myself and my family, that the outcome would have been drastically different. That the complex trauma and the chronic trauma of my neighborhood, if I knew that in sharing stories, we as survivors could have transformed our neighborhoods, that sharing what's happened to us, that we could actually heal not only our communities, but the rest of the country, not only from our specific experiences, but intergenerational trauma. The outcomes are just wildly different than what actually happened. And so I want to talk a little bit about what healing looks like. Because we say healing, we say health, we say violence is a public health issue. But what does that mean? What are we offering up as an alternative? So Sujatha, Dorothy, Ms. Jackson, share with us what you've seen in your conversation with survivors. When you offer up healing, what does that mean? What does that look like for survivors?
Healing for survivors. It starts from the inside out. A lot of times we think we can put on a new dress, change our hairstyle, go to the spa, do all of these things that would work for the outside. But if healing is not transformed from the inside out, all those things don't matter. So healing has to be a not individual thing, because even though we, or I'm going to say myself, we suffered a trauma of the death of our son. But that healing was not just for me, because attached to me is a husband and a father, a black father who just saw his son 15 minutes before the situation. The healing was not just for me, because there was a sister at home that needed to understand the healing. So each one of us, for healing to really begin, it starts with me, but it has to go out to the other parts of those that are affected. Because every one of us have at least 10 people that we know. Those 10 people that we relate to have 10 more people that they know. So from one trauma has already affected 20 people.
Yeah.
Those 20 people have 10 people that they know. That's now gone to 200. Those 200 has 10 people that they know. It has now gone to 2,000. One trauma, one situation changes the lives of not just that family, but the community of families. And if something is not done, it will continue to grow and grow. And we see it in statistics. And I thank Danielle, Common Justice, for recognizing the fact that something has to be done and has to start with that individual. They have to look within themselves and begin to heal. What took them to that place? What brought them there? Maybe it was abuse. Maybe it was gang violence. But what brought them there? And until we get to the core, then all we're going to have is an apple and don't know what's inside of it. So we have to look at this because it is forever growing. Statistics. Common justice is just what it is. We need common justice for everyone. Those that are suffering that are in silence. And until you tell your story. I told my story to a young lady. Didn't know the mother. I knew my son did. And her son got killed. And I went to her house to introduce myself, me and my husband. And there was the house full of people. And she came in and she said, "Who are you?" We introduced ourselves. And you know what she said, which was she needed? She says, "No one in this room can tell me anything but you. I'm glad that they're here, but you're the only one that can help me now get through this process." And she was an angry woman. But this is what we need. Share the story, because that's where healing takes place for you. The more you share, the more you care. And a place like Common Justice is just what it is. Common justice for all. And we can only get that when we share and when we work together to see that that happens.
So I've heard Aqeela say, hurt people, and I hear you saying, healed people, heal people, heal people, heal people. Dorothy.
I'm so glad that this is being broadcast, and there are thousands maybe that are seeing this, because a lot of it has to do with education. I remember folks saying to me, just get past it. Don't talk about it. Just move on. Get past it. Put it behind you. That doesn't help you heal. The sharing of your stories is what helps the healing process. And as Aqeela said, it allows you to open up your mind and be able to accept other kinds of possibilities and ways to heal. I remember, and I think the difference between a victim and a survivor is that a victim hasn't had an opportunity to share and grow or grow from that pain. I remember being a victim. You know, I wanted the worst thing that could happen to Ernest Odom, who killed my son. So, but once I started to share my story and open up for my healing, I saw it bigger than myself and my son. I saw it as a system that we had to deal with. I remember sitting in the courtroom, and I wanted this trial to be over. I wanted him to get justice. I wanted my son to get justice. And I remember thinking, just let me get through this trial. Everything's going to be okay. I'll be so much better. I'll be feeling better. I can go on with my life. But I remember sitting in the courtroom the day that the person who killed my son was sentenced. I remember leaving that courtroom feeling as bad or maybe even worse than I did when I came in. So his sentencing didn't allow me to heal. It didn't make me feel a whole lot better. But I found out then, I was asking what was wrong with him, that he could kill two people, actually, a young man by the name of Justin Donnelly in July and my son in December. What was wrong with him? But now I ask what happened to him. You know, that's so very important, and that's how we have to learn to look at this trauma. You know, somewhere along the line, he wasn't born with a gun in his hand. You know, he wasn't. What happened to him? And that's what we have to get to the bottom of in our communities across this country, to understand what is happening to our communities and the folks in our communities that are making these poor decisions that are landing them in jail and incarcerated. And the other thing I just really want to speak to, too, is that the incarceration, and a lot of people think that the victims' rights speak for all of us. Just like I can't speak for all of us, they can't speak for me. You know, while they want to see, you know, people thrown in jail and the key locked up and throw the key away, that's not going to help me heal. And I learned that at that trial. You know, so we've got to find other ways through trauma centers and ways that we look to heal and educate people that it's important to look for that healing. You know, we come from a community oftentimes that culturally we think that the way you heal is to pray about it and keep it moving. No, but you need more than that. Yeah. We need more than just praying or going to the minister. We need to be in circles and groups like this where we can begin to heal together and heal our communities together, you know, so that we don't lose our loved ones to mass incarceration or to death, because that's no one wins. No one wins.
I just want to add something to the healing. Until healing starts from within and works out, there's not going to be a change. And the young man that killed my son, he pleaded, he did all kinds of things, and his mother was sitting in the courtroom. And he brought a Bible into the court. I guess wanted to impress the judge, whatever. But the judge wasn't having it, because the judge felt that if you knew the Bible, you probably wouldn't be in here. But nevertheless, the mother sat there, and I knew who she was. I never met her. But I had the feeling as a mother, and I said, that's his mother. She turns to me, and she says, my son didn't do what they said he did. And I looked at her as a mother. I said, your son, that's your son, and he's standing before the court. My son is buried in a grave. And you weren't there, and neither was I. But I pray that out of this, there will come some justice for him. Fast forwarding about 2 years ago, me and my husband is on the train coming from the VA. Get on the A train, and we're sitting at the corner, and we had been up early that morning. So my husband fell asleep, and I said, you know, I don't sleep on no A train, C train, B. Okay. Even if the train says sleep, I'm not sleeping. But anyway, he was tired, and he put his head down. And when we rolled into J Street and Borough Hall, the Spirit said to me, the man that killed your son is getting on the train. I turned to my right, and there he was. We locked eye. My husband still was asleep. He said, don't wake him up. He ain't ready for this one. He wasn't ready. You know he wasn't ready. And so I had to keep my hand on his knee. I watched the young man, and he went like this. He knew who I was, and he knew I knew who he was. He sat directly in front of me, and I just looked at him. He looked at me, and he jumped off at the next stop. My question was, did that jail time change his life? I didn't say anything to my husband. I walked home in a different state of mind, quiet. He's like, what's wrong with you? I said, oh, I'm good. It was later on I shared with him that there was the gentleman that killed our son. So I knew healing had happened for me because I was able to sit across from him. Wow. I could have reached and touched him. But it's through the working with common justice again, because we were on a project with them, that helped me understand that the person that did the crime also had crime that was done to them that they never shared. So I say this here, all of this is a generational thing. If we don't put a stop to it, if we don't seek the core of it, healing will never take place. Reincarceration, more jails will go up, less people will have homes, because they see this as a way of lock them up. But locking them up and not restoring them is not the answer.
Thank you. Sujatha, before you answer the question about healing and what it looks like, I'm going to add something to your question, which is we don't believe in pitting survivors and victims, right? We don't believe that dichotomy. It appears to the world that there's this range of perspectives about what it means to have survived harm. So what does it mean to build a system that honors people's experiences but actually works towards healing for everybody? What does it mean to do that?
A few years ago, I had the honor of co-facilitating a circle with child sexual abuse survivors of South Asian descent. And when we ask questions of what does healing look like for you, or what did you need, there's a real range of answers. And I think creating spaces in which people get to bring all of those forward and that we hear all of those voices and allow people to share all of it, I think is really critical. And at the same time, I see themes, right? And so one of the things that I heard over and over again was the need to have your story be heard, particularly by family, and to be believed, and to have the depth of the suffering that you experience be perceived. And some people want to take it the next step and to actually be able to have the conversation with the person who did the harm and to receive the words that only the person who's done the harm to you can give you, which is, it wasn't your fault. This was my fault. Or this is where this came from in my life, which can be incredibly beneficial. And so, to my mind, this is where that line that we draw, not just whatever lines we draw between victims and survivors or between people who've harmed and people who've done harm. I know myself to be someone who has both done harm and experienced harm, right? And so the minute I stopped drawing that line down society, I was able to stop drawing that line down the middle of myself. And I think about it particularly from the perspective of that integrated sense of self is a place where real healing can flow from. And I think the starting point was those who have been most beneficial to me in my healing journey have allowed me to go through all the phases. In the same way that we let people go through the phases of dealing with the death of a loved one, right? Any kind of harm needs that allowing people to go through each phase. And so from my side, there was a lot of grace by some specific individuals along the way that allowed me to be in my rage place. And then there were people who allowed me to be in my forgiveness place, not shoving forgiveness down my throat, but allowing me to be where I was with these things. And so that, to me, is a lot of what it looks like.
Thank you. Audience members, if you have questions, just raise them in the air, and we'll have staff come by. And we have time for one from the audience. So just go ahead and raise them. I want to go back to, DaMareo, what you shared about policy and about situating who we are in context of a large range of external influences and circumstances. So there are organizations like Common Justice, Equal Justice USA, Alliance for Safety and Justice that talk about the billions of federal dollars that are available through the Victims of Crime Act to support the needs of survivors in the wake of harm. But these funds are not actually addressing the things we described here, right? They're not addressing the disproportionate needs in communities of color. If these funds were actually distributed equitably and address the deepest needs of our communities, what would be the vision? What's the survivor movement fighting for? What kind of impact would it have on cycles of violence?
Small question. One thing, well, the first thing I want to put out there is, like, I'm a trained community organizer, which is like a craft and a skill, and it has all of these like principles and axioms and a lot of those things. And I just want to say this so I can say it on camera, and it may get me in trouble, but I want to say it. A lot of the history and the way that I was trained as an organizer, right, it's like this objective view of like, we're the organizers, we're going to go into this community, we're going to find a leader, we're going to organize that leader, and we're going to like, and then like when the public meeting happens, if you really pay attention to the organizers, they're all like standing in the back, right? They're all like watching the thing, but they're not like in the thing. And I think what we're experiencing and like the kind of evolution of this work is that, you know, I am I'm in it, right? And like, it's not like, because we have these practices, and folks in here who are organizers, you've been through like a public and private training or something like that, where it's like, oh, this is work, and then you have this internal thing, which, I mean, honestly, we're starting to explore it as like, it's a very privileged position to be in, right? And like the history of this work is, I mean, when we think about what's written, there's a lot of white men who have written things about what happens and what you're supposed to be as an organizer and how you do this work. And we're redefining that.
Yeah.
Because there's no way for me to be authentically myself and not be from the bottom, regardless of if I've been through the Marine Corps or graduated from college or whatever. When I'm engaging community and when we're talking about building something together and working together and having a dialogue about how to solve problems together, like, I have to be in that. I'm in that.
Yeah.
Right? And so I guess to answer your question, what does it look like and what we're fighting for?
Yeah.
Right? And all of us are in this fight together. What it looks like, and the vision is that we have systems inside of our communities that service human beings, all human beings, right? I had someone was asking me on this other panel I was on, they were like, well, what should we do with these Pacific Island immigrants who are coming into Akron? And what should we do, and what kind of systems we should build for them? And I was thinking to myself, and I actually answered this. I said, well, if we had systems that serviced human beings, we wouldn't ask that question. That wouldn't be the question. There would already be something that is actually servicing them. So I feel that the work of crime survivors and the work that we're trying to do is take money and resources away from the things that are re-traumatizing people, right? Or the way that we think about solving crime is to snatch a human being out of a community, right? Someone who might be helping do something inside of their family, might have got caught doing something to try to support people in their family, right? And then we're gonna take them, we're gonna snatch them out. Then we're gonna put them somewhere where we re-traumatize them, right? Because the things that they had to do to get to that point were probably traumatic experiences. We're gonna put them into this place. We're gonna spend a whole bunch of money to put them into this place. And then we're going to dump them back out into the community when they're done. And in Ohio, ACLU released a report that people are leaving straight from solitary confinement back to the community, right? Without any kind of counseling or anything. And so what we need to do, and what I believe the vision is for our work, is to reallocate this money away from these carceral policies, away from these things that are only focused on punishment. And let me be clear, like, I am not someone who don't think anyone needs to go to prison. I just want to be clear. Like, some people need a timeout. Some people really just need a timeout. But when they get the timeout, there should actually be services there to help them, which is what these ladies are talking about. I want people who have to go to timeout, if you want to call it that, but who have to go there. There actually needs to be services there that's dealing with the whole human. And that we're helping them deal with, like, how they trigger into these things that might have landed them in prison in the first place. And so then we need to build things in our community that are directly affecting drug treatment, mental health treatment, trauma recovery services, and trauma recovery institutions. And money needs to be put back into the community. Resources need to be put back into the community for school programs. Programs that actually help young people have creative and artistic expression. Or after-school programs that are, like, picking up where the schools can't pick up, right? Like, so we really need to be creating communities that are, one, talking to each other and able to have dialogue with each other, but also that we're investing in these things that we historically don't invest in because you don't have a metric to say, like, oh, safety has moved 3 points this way, right? And then, like, we have to invest in things that are actually about building human capacity and having conversation to help people understand critically what's happening inside of their communities, right? Like a critical dialogue. And I don't know how you actually quantify that. Yeah. You know, I'm not sure how you quantify that. I know that there's a qualitative change when someone understands where they are.
Sure. Like
something happens to the human being when they're like, oh, you know, I am an actor in history. I am an actor in culture. I have an analysis. Yeah. I can think critically about my environment, and therefore I can change it. Yeah. I know that is a part of it, right? Like, what we need to do is invest in that.
I'm going to ask Aqeela to contribute to this conversation. So the metrics don't kind of capture the full range of what we need, right? What do we need to pay attention to? What's the vision?
Well, I think that, you know, we've been actively engaged in making the vision happen, to making it a reality.
Yeah.
So, you know, in California, you know, Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice were instrumental in passing Prop 47. Now, you know, in the first year, the savings, there was about close to $70 million we saved the state because we decreased prison population in the first year by 5,500 people. And to date, there's been over 300,000 folks who have had their records expunged, you know. And we just passed, you know, just made another change because, you know, there was a 3-year statute in which, you know, formerly incarcerated folks, many of these individuals shouldn't have been incarcerated in the first place, because they had mental health and health issues, and we were utilizing criminal justice solutions to try to address it. So they shouldn't have been there in the first place. So we set up a savings account, in a sense, in which we redirected that $70 million into 3 pots. So some of the monies went to victim services, some of the money went to K through 12 education, and some of the money went to mental health services, right? And as a result, we funded, you know, initially we had 2 trauma recovery centers. Now these TRCs that are now, you know, located in neighborhoods, San Francisco being the model. If you're victimized, if you're a victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, or you had a loved one murdered, you can go to the TRC without filing a police report and receive services. Yeah. Whereas, you know, most folks, I mean, you know, there's a really polarized relationship between, you know, communities of color and law enforcement. So folks don't feel comfortable initially going to the police to file a police report to be able to access healing services and recovery services. But the TRC now... I'm going to excuse me, because we're getting close to the end.
Yes. Thank you so much, because you're making the vision a reality. You can see the passion, right? These are organizers who are out there on the front line, right?
And if I could just say real quick that we also just passed legislation in Ohio. So there's 5 TRCs that are rolling out in Ohio. And the same thing in Illinois. So there's, you know, 5 TRCs that's going to roll out with 2872 as well.
Powerful. We have 10 seconds left, and I wanted to, one audience question, and Sujatha, I wanted to give it to you. This is about inclusion, right? It's about inclusion. How do we include LGBTQ folks, right? People of color in this conversation, in this broader movement. What does inclusion look like?
One of the words that was central to the truth and reconciliation process in South Africa is Ubuntu. It means I am because we are, right? Or a person is a person through other people. And there's no line drawn, right, about which ones are in and which ones are out. I mean, again, from my side as a restorative justice practitioner, really we start with, you know, how were you harmed and what do you need? And to keep our ears open, regardless of what that person is saying, and to not put our own personal cultural overlays, right? When I'm sitting there as a facilitator of restorative process and somebody says to me what they need, it may look really different from what I need, right? And so it doesn't matter if it's a transgender child who's been formerly incarcerated, or if it's whoever it is, it's a very different lived experience than my own. If I am truly listening, the people with the lived experience, whatever that lived experience is, no matter how different it is from mine, are the ones with the answers about what they need in order to heal, right? What they need in order for this to have not happened in the first place. I can guess all I want, but that is arrogant folly, right? And so from my side, it is really about listening. Like, what do you need? How do you define the harm? And the same goes for folks who've done harm, right? They have different lived experiences than mine as well. And so what do they need, right? So it doesn't matter if it's LGBT kids or if it's who it is, right? If it's different, if it's the same, even if it's somebody who's literally had the same life as mine, their answers may be different. Yeah. And so we have to keep our minds and particularly our hearts open. We have to have a curious heart, not like putting people in a petri dish and being all like, ooh, what's your life look like? That, you know, so from my side, it's really about that, having a curious heart about different lived experiences and then letting that move towards that idea of Aqeela's law, right? Like, let's take that all the way to policy, because that wisdom of lived experience is what's going to give us the actual solutions.
Panelists, thank you so much for your open hearts and for your contribution. Thank you so much. It's been powerful.